We were playing a lot of blues at the time in Birmingham, in England, and we thought it would be a good idea, actually, and they were called Mitchells and Butlers beers. The blues up
beer.
There, right. So we came up with Moody.
When Nights in White Satin echoes through the night, the first thing that stills the listener is not the voice, not the beat, but the flute. A sound as fragile as mist, brushing lightly against memory, then drifting out like a fairy tale breath in a spinning world. Few know that behind that sound was a man who disliked noise, shunned the spotlight, and cared even less about recognition. Ray Thomas, the quiet soul of the Moody Blues. He was not the kind of man who gave interviews, didn't front the band, and never offered shocking statements or lived with reckless abandon like so many rock stars of his time. And perhaps that's exactly what made him different and deeper. Ray Thomas didn't need to step forward to prove himself. He simply took a step back, raised his flute, and let the music speak. Bringing a classical, spiritual essence and a haunting beauty into the heart of progressive rock, Ray helped transform the Moody Blues from an R&B group into a metaphysical art icon of the 1960s to 70s. In a musical world increasingly shaped by technology and trends, Ray chose authenticity, chose folk instruments, and chose the harder path, to stay true to his inner self. His story has no scandals, no blazing peaks followed by collapse. Only a quiet journey inward, into philosophy, into the listener's soul through wordless music. And perhaps that is why Ray Thomas was not just an artist, but a spiritual phenomenon, a silent echo of an era that will never return. Early life. Ray Thomas was born on December 29, 1941, in the small town of Stourport on Severn, Worcestershire, England. A peaceful yet quiet place, where long winters stretched endlessly, and the only sound to slip into a child's soul was the faint hum of an old radio playing melancholic folk tunes from the BBC. Ray grew up in a modest working-class family. No dramatic tragedies, but never any clear encouragement either. And within that emptiness, music became a silent lifeline, a way for the boy to connect with a world he had never truly felt he belonged to. Ray's father was a quiet man who worked in the local industry and lived by traditional values: silence, hard work, and practicality. To him, music wasn't forbidden, but neither was it encouraged. When Ray played the flute in his room, his father didn't get angry, but he never stepped inside either. He simply closed the door gently. That small gesture, repeated again and again, planted a thought in Ray. If he ever wanted to be heard, he would have to play beautifully. Beautifully enough to silence the world. Ray's mother, though reserved, was the one who sowed the first seed of emotion in him. She didn't support the dream of music, but when Ray was small, she often lulled him to sleep with Midlands folk songs. Her voice was thin, sometimes off-key, but it carried sadness and deep affection. Ray never forgot those melodies, because in those rare moments, he felt like he belonged somewhere, even if only for a few minutes in his mother's arms. His first teacher, and the only one who truly encouraged him, was his grandfather, a retired man who loved music and believed that sound could heal anything. He gave Ray his first harmonica, taught him how to play with his breath and feel with his heart. The flute, Ray taught himself by instinct, imagination, and a loneliness that no one in the house ever asked about. At school, Ray was teased for choosing the flute over the guitar. In an era when rock was rising, the flute was seen as weak, feminine, and unfit for rebellious boys. But Ray didn't quit. He remained silent, practiced, recorded himself on old cassettes, believing that this sound, however fragile, could open doors to spaces where words could never reach. Before stepping into professional music, Ray did every job imaginable: mechanic, welder, laborer in the factories of the West Midlands. Those years, though difficult, laid the foundation that kept him grounded throughout his career. discipline, perseverance, and humility. Three things he would carry not just into the band, but into every note of flute he ever played. In a noisy world, Ray Thomas grew up in silence. But from that very silence, he created a kind of music that made the world stop and listen. Early career. In the early 1960s, while most young Brits were rushing to follow American rock and roll and the skiffle craze, Ray Thomas chose a different path, blending classical melodies with metaphysical ideas, even though he himself couldn't quite define what kind of music he was pursuing. Starting with harmonica and flute in small Birmingham bands, Ray gradually became known as a versatile musician, one who didn't seek the spotlight, yet always made others stop and listen when he played. The first serious band he joined was El Riot and the Rebels, where he met a close friend, John Lodge, who would later become his lifelong collaborator in the Moody Blues. The group mostly played in Midland's tea rooms, nightclubs, and pubs. They mixed R&B, jazz, and folk, creating a distinct flavor among the wave of Beatles-inspired acts. Although they never landed a recording deal, El Riot and the Rebels became Ray's proving ground, shaping his performance style and ability to write under pressure. By 1964, a turning point arrived when Ray joined a newly formed R&B group in Birmingham, initially named the M&B 5, after beer company Mitchells and Butlers, which sponsored them. When the sponsorship fell through, the band renamed themselves the Moody Blues, a name that preserved a dreamlike aura while emphasizing the blues element in their music. At first, the band followed a conventional rhythm and blues direction and saw moderate success with the 1965 hit Go Now, sung by lead vocalist Denny Laine. But when Denny Laine left in 1966 and a young romantic-minded musician named Justin Hayward joined, Ray Thomas began to envision something far beyond traditional R&B. Together with Hayward and Mike Pinder, an enthusiast of the Mellotron electronic keyboard, Ray proposed a radical new direction to integrate classical instruments, such as flute, strings, and oboe, into modern rock song structures. It was a bold idea at the time, but it laid the foundation for one of the most important albums in rock history, Days of Future Past, 1967. Ray not only co-wrote songs, but also introduced the traverse flute to a rock album in a fully integrated way, not merely as decorative flair, but as a real character within the musical narrative. And when his flute soared through Nights in White Satin, drifting, sorrowful yet graceful, the world began to realize rock could weep, could dream, could meditate, and could transcend the 4/4 beat and conventional love song lyrics. Ray Thomas's early career wasn't defined by stage lights or wild solos. It began with quietly carving a space for the flute within a sea of noise. And it was precisely that choice, to follow no one, that ultimately made him a pioneer of a new genre, surrealist rock, rock of the mind, rock of depth. Career success. If Nights in White Satin was the door that led the Moody Blues into the pantheon of classic rock, then Ray Thomas was the one who held the key. Following the resounding success of Days of Future Past, 1967, the band entered the most glorious phase of their career, a string of concept albums that would come to define the height of progressive rock. And there, though he was neither the frontman nor the lead singer, Ray quietly left an irreplaceable mark. In Search of the Lost Chord, 1968, Ray contributed one of his most personal and distinctive compositions, Legend of a Mind. The song paid tribute to Timothy Leary, the icon of LSD culture, but it went far beyond a simple homage. With expansive flute passages, a surreal middle section, and a hauntingly repetitive ending, Ray transformed the track into a spiritual journey, one where the search wasn't just for truth, but for the self. It was one of the rare times the flute took center stage as a narrative instrument, not just ornamental, and critics hailed it as a metaphysical meditation at the heart of rock. Ray went on to write and perform several poetic, philosophical songs that quietly shaped the soul of the band. Dr. Livingstone, I Presume, 1968. Blending history, adventure, and subtle skepticism about savior myths. Floating, 1969. A lullaby about space travel for children, tinged with irony about the arms race. And the Tide Rushes In, 1970. A gentle yet stinging portrait of a man post-heartbreak. For My Lady, 1972. A folk love song where Ray's flute and voice intertwined like wind and water. Though Ray's songs were rarely chosen as singles, they played a vital role in the structure of each album. They were the breaths, the pauses, the emotional ruptures, the very things that grand Mellotron swells or electric guitar riffs couldn't express. In the musical world of the Moody Blues, where time, space, love, and consciousness were rearranged like a spiritual map, Ray drew the essential blank spaces where listeners could breathe. From 1967 to 1972, the Moody Blues released 7 consecutive albums that achieved both critical and commercial success, establishing them as pioneers of global progressive rock. While Justin Hayward and John Lodge were the public faces, Ray was the guardian of the band's folk roots, metaphysical leanings, and emotional undercurrents, keeping them from falling into the trap of pure technicality or sterile formalism. In 1974, the Moody Blues took a hiatus. While other members pursued solo projects, Ray released 2 solo albums, From Mighty Oaks, 1975, and Hopes, Wishes, and Dreams, 1976. Though they didn't make a major commercial impact, the albums were deeply personal worlds of their own, sincere, introspective, rich with ballads and steeped in feelings of loss, hope, and quiet regret. Once again, Ray refused to chase the trends of glam rock or disco, remaining loyal to his understated identity. When the Moody Blues reunited in the late 1970s and transitioned into the synth-pop era, Ray's role gradually diminished. Yet he still appeared on albums like Long Distance Voyager, 1981, and The Present, 1983, contributing final songs like Veteran Cosmic Rocker, half humorous, half aching, a self-aware monologue from an aging artist still dreaming of spiritual voyages in an increasingly pragmatic world. Across nearly 40 years with the Moody Blues, Ray Thomas was never the center of the stage, but he was the spiritual center. If Justin Hayward was the voice, John Lodge the heartbeat, Graham Edge the poetic mind, then Ray was the soul. A soul that never clamored for attention, but could never be absent. Personal life. In a decade when rock was synonymous with loud breakups, tangled love triangles, and rampant drug use, Ray Thomas chose a life so simple. People nearly forgot he was a rock star at all. He fell in love early, married early, and kept his family intact until the end of his life. No scandals, no headlines, just quiet evenings by the fireplace, the soft sound of flute drifting through the room, and sometimes a glass of whiskey shared with his wife and son. His wife, Lee Thomas, was not a celebrity nor a media muse, but to Ray she was the only piece in an industry that demands constant reinvention. They lived in an old house in Surrey, raised dogs, planted trees, and stayed as far from the spotlight as possible. Those who visited remember Ray as a gracious, thoughtful host who often told stories, through instruments. But that quiet life began to tremble in the early 2000s. Ray noticed he was losing balance during performances. At first, it was the occasional misstep on stage. Then came the dizziness while playing flute, as if his inner ear had lost all control. He thought it was just age catching up. But after a series of tests, he was diagnosed with cerebellar ataxia, a rare neurological disorder that affects coordination, speech, and balance. It wasn't just an illness. It was a sentence. For an artist who lived through the subtle control of breath, fingers, and movement, Losing balance meant losing the stage. In 2002, Ray Thomas announced his retirement. No fanfare, no farewell tour, just a brief message to fans. I know when it's time to step away. For years afterward, he lived in near seclusion. He gave no interviews, made no comebacks like many aging rockers. But those close to him knew. He was still writing music, still playing the flute, even if just for himself and the ones he loved. That was a period of facing himself, of surrendering to silence not by choice, but by inevitability, and of living with memories that slowly faded like echoes of a golden age. In 2013, Ray faced another blow. He was diagnosed with prostate cancer. This time, instead of staying silent, he went public, encouraging middle-aged men to get routine health checks. "If I speak up, maybe someone will listen," he wrote in an open letter. Though he survived the early stages of the disease, his health declined markedly. In his final years, Ray lived almost entirely out of the public eye, no longer appearing on Moody Blues tours, no longer participating in tribute events. Yet he remained in the band's spirit and in the audience's hearts, as someone who never really left, just quietly stayed in the background. On January 4, 2018, Ray Thomas passed away in his sleep at home, aged 76. He left as he had lived, quietly, without noise, without a public funeral. Just months later, the Moody Blues were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, an honor Ray had waited for most of his life, but never got to witness. At the induction ceremony, Justin Hayward said with emotion, "Without Ray, there would be no Moody Blues as we know them. He didn't just bring the flute to rock, he brought the soul." Legacy and influence. Perhaps the greatest legacy Ray Thomas left behind wasn't in record sales, prestigious awards, or chart positions, but in something far more subtle. He proved that rock didn't need to scream to be powerful, didn't need massive stages to become immortal. In an era when music chased spectacle, Ray chose a role so modest it seemed almost forgettable, the flautist. But through that very flute, he opened a new dimension in rock, one where sound could guide the mind through memory, dreams, and philosophy. He didn't merely play an instrument, he told stories through sound, stories that needed no words, only a heart willing to listen. Many of the songs he wrote for the Moody Blues were not commercial hits, but they formed the artistic core of the band. Legend of a Mind was a chronicle of a generation both awakened and lost. Floating whispered softly of space and a child's boundless imagination. For My Lady was a love song without glitter, just a whisper from a soul that knew how to love. Veteran Cosmic Rocker was a humorous and slightly bitter monologue from an old artist looking back on his metaphysical journey. But Ray's legacy didn't stop with music. Within the Moody Blues, he was the invisible glue, the one who kept the contrasting pieces from falling apart. When the band argued, when egos clashed, it was Ray who would step out to the balcony, play a few flute phrases, smile, and ease the tension. He never imposed, he simply created space for others to recalibrate. Offstage, Ray was a model of an artist loyal to his essence. Over nearly 40 years in the industry, he never chased trends, never flaunted technique, never said what was expected, and that unwavering authenticity earned him deep respect within the artistic community, from psychedelic rockers to modern classical composers. Most poignantly, Ray's final legacy came from his silence. By choosing a life of quiet reclusion, by refusing spectacle even when illness struck, he made people realize true artists don't need attention. They need to be heard. And he achieved that, not through shock value, but through a single flute note that could make an entire generation pause and dream. To this day, few have dared to walk the path Ray once chose, bringing classical instruments into rock without diluting either identity. Perhaps that's why he remains irreplaceable, not just within the Moody Blues, not just in progressive rock, but in the hearts of those who once heard that flute in the middle of the night and knew they'd just been led into another world. The years after his passing, though Ray Thomas passed away in the winter of 2018, his music and his spirit never truly left. The fragile flute in Nights in White Satin still drifts through Moody Blues live concerts, like a gentle greeting from the other side. The band may no longer perform regularly, but whenever that song plays, audiences, young and old alike, understand. Ray's soul is still present, not in image, but in the sound he left behind. His family, much like Ray himself in life, chose to honor him with quiet dignity. They didn't build statues or commission grand biopics. Instead, they quietly partnered with record labels to reissue rare compilations, including box sets, remastered solo albums, and archival recordings from the 1970s. Not to commercialize his memory, but to give younger listeners, those who never saw Ray perform, a chance to touch a part of the spirit he left behind. Strangely, the farther we move from his golden years, the more deeply Ray's legacy is cherished by new generations. Young artists across psychedelic folk, progressive acoustic, even indie pop, now cite him as a model of resilience, humility, and artistic honesty. They don't imitate his flute, because no one truly can, but they learn from his unwavering commitment to personal identity, even if it meant standing outside the crowd. Starting in 2019, fan communities in the UK, the US, and Germany began holding tribute nights for Ray Thomas. There were no big stages, no professional hosts, just old cassette players, a few longtime Moody Blues friends, and some quiet young people covering For My Lady on acoustic guitars in public parks. All of them shared one thing: gratitude for the flautist, the man who never shouted but made the world go still. Ray Thomas may have left the stage, but somehow, he never really left the music he gave us. And in a world that grows louder every day, perhaps the most beautiful thing he ever did was teach us how to listen to silence. Ray Thomas was never the kind of man who overwhelmed you at first sight. He didn't wear glittering jackets, didn't scream into the microphone, didn't smash guitars on stage. He simply stood there, sometimes hidden in the shadows, and played the flute. And yet, somehow it was that man, with a tiny flute in his hands, who gave us one of the most profound and distinctive voices in the history of rock music. For over 4 decades, he was the quiet heart of the Moody Blues, bringing gentleness, metaphysics, and a deeply human spirit into the band, something few artists of his time ever reached. He wrote of love without noise, of the universe without spectacle, of loneliness without despair. And through the flute, he created pockets of silence where listeners could dream, reflect, and even forgive themselves. He didn't need a stage to shine, because his light came from within. He didn't need to be named on every list of the greats, because he never made music to be honored. Every melody Ray Thomas left behind was a piece of his soul, unadorned, uncalculated, like dew resting on a leaf, like a breeze passing through a quiet afternoon. Today, in a world where artists often get swept up in media, controversy, and ego, Ray reminds us, to make art is not to be seen, but to be heard, even if only by one person. And if you've ever paused in the middle of the night, put on a Moody Blues track, and felt your heart sink at the sound of a fragile flute, maybe Ray Thomas is still there, speaking to you in a language only he knew. Do you remember where you were the first time you heard Nights in White Satin? Share that memory with us, so that flute may never stop echoing. And if you love stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe, so you won't miss the next journey.